It was 7:55 a.m. at Forward Operating Base Ashford, and the heat already pressed down with a weight that felt almost alive against the skin. The steady growl of diesel generators broke the quiet, mingling with the faint aroma of burnt coffee and the dry scent of dust that clung to every surface inside the concrete room. A cluster of folding chairs stood in crooked lines, all aimed toward a sun-faded map of the valley taped onto a worn whiteboard. Rangers from the 75th Regiment sat silently, sleeves rolled up, their expressions blank and focused. Along the back wall, a few SEALs leaned casually, adjusting their gear with the methodical calm of men who had done this countless times before. The only other sound was the faint, rhythmic click of metal on metal coming from the corner, someone cleaning a rifle. Staff Sergeant Emily Vance sat apart from the others, her Barrett M107A1 stretched across her knees, the matte, black receiver catching the fluorescent light with a faint gleam. Every movement she made was slow, deliberate, and measured, her hand gliding over the bolt face and chamber in smooth repetition. To anyone watching, it looked like maintenance. To her, it was meditation, a way to steady her breathing before the mission briefing, to shut out the endless hum of life on base. Outside, the faint thump of rotor blades drifted closer, probably a Blackhawk tracing the perimeter. Inside, boots shuffled as more men filed in. The quiet murmur of talk faded instantly when a small group of officers entered the room. At their center was Rear Admiral Philip Grant, commander of the Joint Task Force. His khaki uniform looked freshly pressed, silver stars bright on his collar, boots far too clean for this stretch of desert. His eyes moved across the room like a scan, precise, calculating, making everyone unconsciously straighten in their seats. Then his gaze landed on her. He slowed. His attention lingered on the long rifle resting across Emily's lap, and the faintest smirk tugged at his lips as he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "So, this is the one they're calling the best shot on base. You sure that rifle doesn't weigh more than you, Sergeant?" The air tightened. Nobody laughed. The kind of silence that comes when respect meets rank settled thick in the room. Emily didn't flinch. She simply placed the cleaning cloth aside and inspected the bolt again, her focus unbroken. Chief Warrant Officer Torres, standing near the projector, finally spoke in a careful, steady tone. "Sir, Staff Sergeant Vance holds the range record. 2,000 yards confirmed." Grant waved a hand, dismissive. "Records don't win wars, Chief. Guts do." "Records don't win wars, Chief. Grit does." Grant's voice cut through the air as he stepped closer, his polished boots whispering against the concrete. He reached down and wrapped his hand around the rifle's barrel, as if testing its weight, the faint metallic shift echoing through the room like the edge of a blade being drawn. Every Ranger and SEAL went still. No one had to say a word. Everyone knew you never touched another sniper's rifle. Not one that was zeroed. Not without permission. It wasn't written in any manual, but it was law. Emily Vance finally lifted her eyes. Her voice came out calm, steady, unshaken. "Sir, with respect, please take your hand off my rifle. It's zeroed for my profile." The room froze. Grant's expression didn't change, but his fingers faltered for half a heartbeat before he finally released the barrel. The weapon settled softly back across her lap. He smiled. A practiced, shallow expression that never touched his eyes. "We'll see how steady those hands are when it counts, Sergeant. Maybe you'll show us what all the fuss is about." Emily gave a single nod, the smallest acknowledgement. No defiance, no pride, just control. She picked up her cloth again and resumed wiping the barrel, each stroke as deliberate as before. The quiet swish of fabric over steel filled the room, a slow, rhythmic defiance. Somewhere in that silence, something invisible had shifted. A line had been crossed. And though nobody spoke it aloud, everyone in the room felt it. Sheridan, Wyoming, lay between low, rolling hills and endless stretches of wind-beaten plains that looked like they'd been carved by time itself. It was the kind of place where the sky seemed impossibly wide, where fences leaned tired into the wind and old trucks rusted half-buried in the dust. That's where Emily Vance grew up, in a house that smelled of coffee, gun oil, and quiet mornings. Her grandfather, Viktor Kovalenko, spoke little, but carried the calm authority of someone who had seen war and never needed to prove it. A ranger marksman from Vietnam, he didn't tell stories. He didn't glorify what he'd done. He simply kept his old Remington 700 locked in a wooden case behind the door and treated it with the reverence others reserved for church. When Emily turned 8, he began teaching her, not with lessons, but with silence. Before dawn, they'd drive out past the town's edge, the old pickup rattling down dirt roads as pale light crept across the prairie. He'd set the rifle on a sandbag, adjust the scope, and step back, letting her feel its weight for herself. He didn't explain much, didn't lecture. He just showed her what control looked like. The way his cheek met the stock, the way his breathing slowed until it matched the wind, the patience before the trigger broke. He let her hold the rifle and feel its weight, the cool metal grounding her in a way words never could. She watched him closely, the way his cheek rested against the stock, how his breathing slowed until it moved in sync with the breeze, how he waited, patient and silent, until the world itself seemed to stop. The first time she pulled the trigger, the recoil jolted her, and the shot rolled across the open field before fading into the wind. Her grandfather didn't say good job or try again. He just gave a single nod and pointed toward the target. The shot was a little high, but clean, precise. That silence after the echo became her obsession, that weightless moment where everything aligned. Her father, a former Marine who'd spent his youth crammed inside an AAV-7 during Desert Storm, didn't approve. To him, shooting wasn't a life. It was a pastime, something she'd outgrow when she found a safer path. But she didn't stop. Every weekend, no matter the weather, she went with her grandfather. Even when the wind cut like knives and the snow swallowed the prairie, they'd set up out there among the frost and silence. Time didn't rush in those fields. It taught her patience, and patience became her instinct. By 16, Emily Vance could knock over a tin can at 500 yards and never miss twice. Her grandfather never celebrated it with words. He'd just hand the rifle back and say one thing, again. That was all she ever needed. When she turned 18 and told them she was joining the army, her father didn't argue, but he didn't smile either. He helped her load her bag into the truck, shut the door, and said nothing. Her grandfather stayed on the porch, watching. He didn't tell her to be careful or make him proud. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old cleaning cloth, frayed, thin, softened by years of use. "Keep it clean," he said quietly, his voice as steady as the wind moving through the grass. She understood. The cloth wasn't just for her weapon, it was a lesson. Discipline, respect, silence. That was her inheritance. Fort Moore greeted her with the kind of heat that wrapped around you like wet fabric, thick with humidity, and the red clay that clung to boots, packs, and skin alike. Training started at 5, though nobody ever said the hour aloud. It was just how the rhythm went. Boots pounding the ground, rucks crashing onto shoulders, and the heavy breath of exhaustion mixing with the drone of cicadas. The sniper course wasn't designed for comfort. It was built to test control. Emily Vance learned that lesson fast. She was the only woman in her class, and while no one dared to say anything outright, the looks said plenty. Quiet, assessing, waiting to see if she'd fail. She felt it in small things. The instructors double-checking her kit, the way some of the men waited to see if she would slip up before they even used her name. She didn't resent them. She answered by working harder. Each day began with a 6-mile ruck uphill, 50 pounds on her back, and sweat soaking her uniform before the sun cleared the trees. Then came obstacle drills, crawling under barbed wire through mud that clung to skin for days, and the long, grinding hours on the range. At first, the instructors ran the basics again: range estimation, target detection, calling the wind. Skills Emily Vance already knew, but here precision mattered in a way it hadn't before. One mistake in the wind calculation could throw a shot. One missed target sent you back to 0. She kept a small notebook tucked inside her sleeve, logging every correction, every error. Her dope sheets filled fast with numbers and hand-drawn wind charts. The course cycled through rifles: the Mac 13 Mod 7 for mid-range work, the M2010 ESR for varied elevation, and she handled them both. But the Barrett M197A was the one that fit her. Its weight punished mistakes, but she respected its honesty. With a 50, you either earned control or it took you apart. The recoil didn't scare her. It taught rhythm in live fire drills. She drilled the fundamentals: trigger squeeze, breath control, sight picture, follow-through. One master sergeant, a combat veteran with a badge from Afghanistan, stood behind her after an exercise one afternoon. When her round broke clean and the steel rang almost a mile away, he told her quietly that her trigger pull was the cleanest he'd seen in 15 years. She didn't answer. She simply chambered the next round. Praise didn't qualify anyone. Nights were the worst. While others fell asleep after chow, Emily stayed up under the dim halo of her headlamp, cleaning her rifle, checking data, memorizing dope cards until her vision blurred. Her hands moved on habit, oiling the bolt, checking the chamber, less from nerves than from ritual, the same discipline her grandfather had taught her. By the end of the course, the jokes faded into background noise. Instructors stopped triple-checking her logs and began pulling her data to help calibrate everyone else's shots. When graduation arrived, her name came first. She stood at attention, uniform still dust-streaked from the last range drill. The battalion commander passed her the certificate with a firm handshake. No speech, no applause, only a nod that said everything. She returned that nod, slipped the paper under her arm, and stepped down from the platform. There was no party waiting, and she didn't want one. She had already earned what mattered: respect, precision, and silence. The room had gone quiet after Rear Admiral Philip Grant's jab, but the tension lingered like static. Rangers and SEALs sat frozen, unsure whether to look at the Admiral or at the woman he had just belittled. The overhead lights hummed. The air conditioner rattled faintly. Emily Vance did not move. Her hands stayed on the Barrett M197A1 lying across the table, its black skin catching the dull light exactly as it had earlier. Grant's boots clicked on concrete as he walked around, his rank giving him the authority to command the space. Yet, in that moment, every man there knew he'd crossed a line authority couldn't excuse. He paused at the table and lifted the rifle again, rolling it in his hands like a toy, as if judging its balance. "Not bad," he said, voice carrying to the back. "Feels heavy. Probably too much rifle for a sergeant." The way he said it made the silence denser. Nobody laughed. A ranger shifted. Metal scraped concrete for a heartbeat, then everything froze. Emily's face stayed fixed, chin level, shoulders square. When she spoke, it was flat and exact. "Sir, set the weapon down. It's zeroed for my profile. Her tone wasn't anger. It was procedure, professional and unambiguous. Yet, among those operators, it read like a warning. Grant ignored the correction and tightened his grip, one hand near the receiver, the other under the muzzle, tilting it as if to sight down the barrel. "You know, Sergeant," he began. "I've seen plenty of shooters rely too much on their glass," Grant said, voice sharp with condescension. "You start trusting the scope more than your instincts, and that's when you forget what real skill looks like." That was when Emily moved. No burst of anger, no sudden aggression, just pure precision. Her right foot slid forward, shifting her balance as her left hand snapped up, locking around his wrist near the joint. Her thumb pressed into the radial nerve while her shoulder turned into the motion. Half a second of controlled torque, enough to force his hand open. The rifle dropped to the table with a soft metallic thud. Grant fell to one knee, eyes wide, face draining pale from the surge of pain in his arm. No one breathed. Every man in the room had trained for combat, but none had ever witnessed something like this between a junior NCO and a flag officer. Emily released him after a heartbeat. Grant stayed down, clutching his wrist, unharmed but stripped of pride. She stepped back into position, posture sharp, voice even. "Sir, give me 6 targets, any distance, any time. If I miss one, I'll pack my gear and request reassignment." The air conditioner's hum crept back into the silence. Grant's jaw flexed as he stood, pride forcing him upright more than strength. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "You'll get your 6. The words cut like a blade. The silence that followed stretched forever. Rangers exchanged glances, the kind that said everything without sound. A whisper carried from the back. "This'll be all over base by noon." Grant turned away, smoothing his uniform, pretending the briefing still mattered, but everyone knew it was done. Emily stood unmoving, eyes forward, expression unreadable. In that quiet, the balance of respect shifted, not through rank or authority, but through control, precision, and the kind of courage that didn't need to shout. By 10:20 a.m., the heat had settled over Range 14 like a veil. The air shimmered above the dirt berms, dry and metallic, carrying the scent of spent brass and anticipation. A low, electric buzz of anticipation moved through the small crowd along the perimeter. Rangers in tan, SEALs in dark camo, and a handful of Air Force JTACs standing shoulder to shoulder, silent and waiting. None of them had been ordered out here. The news had simply spread. Rear Admiral Philip Grant lingered off to the side with his right hand wrapped, jaw tight, his pride hurting more than the skin beneath the bandage. All eyes fixed on the prone figure on a sand-colored mat near the firing line. Staff Sergeant Emily Vance, perfectly still behind her Barrett M107A1, the rifle sitting on its bipod like part of her body as she worked with quiet, methodical care. She tuned the Schmidt & Bender PM2, easing the elevation turret to confirm 0, settling her cheek into the familiar pocket against the stock, firm, comfortable, grounding. To her left, Sergeant Owens knelt at the spotting scope, rangefinder clipped to his vest, calling distances in a low, steady voice. 800 meters, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, 1,600, 1,810. His cadence was professional, but even he felt the weight of what this moment meant. Emily flipped open her laminated dope sheet and cross-checked her handwritten notes, adjusted her kestrel for a 13-knot crosswind from the northwest, gusting just enough to make each shot a lesson in patience, then logged temperature, barometric pressure, and air density. She ran the corrections through her head, breathing slowing as the calculations settled. Each click of the turret marked a decision. Distance, elevation, wind drift, She wasn't thinking about the crowd or the admiral. She heard her grandfather's voice instead. Listen to the wind, don't fight it. She chambered the first round. The bolt slid forward with a clean metallic sound. The first target, 800 meters, loomed. She let half a breath go and squeezed. The report cracked like thunder. Half a second later, the steel rang hollow and true. She cycled the bolt, slow and deliberate. 1,000 meters. The mirage began to dance, twisting the valley air like glass. She held a half-mil right for wind. The round punched center mass. Another clean impact. 1,200. Light shifted. The wind tugged harder from her 9 o'clock. She clicked one click up and a 1/4 mil left. The plate rocked again. She barely blinked. 1,400. The heat wavered the air into ripples, the mirage bending her sight through the scope. She read the dust pattern, nudged elevation and squeezed. The return took longer, but it came. 1,600. The wind pushed erratic and strong. She waited, not just a beat, but long enough to feel the shift. The gust eased. She exhaled, and the round punched the steel through the shoulder mark. The final target sat at 1,810 meters, the outer edge of the Barrett's comfort. Everything fell still. Even the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Emily Vance dialed 4.2 mils up, held 3 right for wind, found the trigger and built pressure until it broke. The rifle bucked hard. Recoil hammered her shoulder, then silence. 1 second, 2, 3, and the steel's note rang deep and final across the valley. No one moved. The echo thinned into the wind. She cleared the chamber, ejected the spent casing, and set the Barrett down with care. Sergeant Owens looked up from the spotting scope and gave a single, crisp nod. 6 for 6. Rear Admiral Grant walked forward, his boots crunching on the dirt as the operators subtly parted to let him pass. He stopped beside the shooting mat and with a slow, deliberate motion, returned a salute. His voice carried clear across the range. "Staff Sergeant Vance, I was wrong." She rose, dust clinging to her sleeves, and returned the salute without a word. For a long beat no one spoke. Then the valley sighed as the wind returned, carrying the faint ring of that last shot. Less a triumph than the sound of balance snapping back into place. Dawn eased into the mountains of northern Kurdistan, mist clinging low to the rocks like smoke from a dying fire. Below, rotor blades hummed faintly as the insertion team completed their drop. The radio on Emily Vance's vest crackled, the clipped rhythm of call signs and coordinates whispering in her ear. It was Eldorado 5:30 when Operation Dawnlight began. Emily Vance lay prone inside a camouflaged hide dug deep into the ridge, the netting over her dusted with sand and bits of dry brush. Her Barrett M107A1 rested firm on its bipod, stock snug in her shoulder, the scope dialed perfectly for the dim light. Her kestrel read wind 5 knots out of the west. She clicked a 1/4 mil right, inhaled once, and steadied her world to the valley below, just a handful of moving silhouettes. Beneath her, a platoon of rangers and a small SEAL element crept through the defile, careful and deliberate, rifles high. Her role was simple. See everything before it saw them. Sergeant Owens' voice whispered through her earpiece, calm and clipped. 3 sentries, ridge left, 900 out. Emily shifted, crosshairs hovering on the first man leaning lazily against a rock, binoculars raised. Half a click for drop, squeeze, crack. Recoil drove her shoulder. The sentry fell without sound. She rolled to the second, then the third, each shot slower, more deliberate. Wind, breath, trigger, impact. The rhythm constant. Minutes blurred into an hour. The valley still, except for radio murmurs. Acknowledgments, coordinates, steady voices. When the next call came, Moving patrol, 2 targets, rooftop, 1200. Her pulse stayed level. Exhale, heart between beats, 2 rounds, 2 hits. Then a flicker. Sunlight flashing off glass near a crumbled tower. Her instincts tightened even before Owens called it. Possible overwatch. She adjusted elevation, held her breath. Through the scope, an enemy sniper leaned out, glass aimed toward her. He never finished. Her round hit first, snapping him out of view. By 0640, the mission was done. 6 high-value targets captured, 0 friendly losses. Her after-action report contained nothing but data and coordinates. Days later, in a quiet office back on base, Rear Admiral Philip Grant paused over her name while signing off the review. Under the Silver Star recommendation, he added a single handwritten line. For precision, courage, and restraint. 2 weeks later, the medal was pinned to her chest at Fort Liberty. The morning sun stretched across the formation lines, glinting off polished boots and starched uniforms. The air carried that familiar mix of dust and discipline. When her name was called, Emily Vance stepped forward, posture straight, gaze fixed ahead. She accepted the Silver Star with a single nod. No applause, no speech, just silence that said more than words ever could. The ceremony ended the way it began, quietly. The wind swept through the field, bending flags and blurring the sound of boots on gravel. The world moved on, exactly as it always did. Later, the light inside the old farmhouse fell soft and golden across the worn wooden floor, the kind of glow that felt like the day's final breath. The air was still, scented faintly with oil and pine. On the table rested 2 badges, her grandfather's faded ranger tab, its edges dulled by years, and her own Silver Star, catching sunlight in muted flashes. Emily sat alone, her uniform jacket folded neatly over the chair beside her. She reached for the frayed cleaning cloth her grandfather had given her long ago, its fabric thin from time. Her movements were patient, steady, the cloth gliding over both badges with the same care she once used to clean her rifle. Outside, the Wyoming wind brushed softly against the windows, the same wind that had whispered across the prairies of her childhood. She listened, a faint smile touching her face, realizing it had never really left. It had simply carried their legacy forward. 2 hearts bound by silence, precision, and the kind of strength that doesn't need words.